Today's lesson is on the properties of addition and multiplication. First, we're going to look at the commutative property. The commutative property tells us that changing the order of addends or factors does not change the sum or product. So first we can look at addition. We can change the order and it will not change the sum. So for number 1, 5 plus 8 is the same thing as 8 plus 5. Because you notice that 5 plus 8 is 13, and 8 plus 5 is also 13. We can look at this with variables as well. A plus B would be the same thing as saying B plus A. We also can use the commutative property with multiplication. So for number 3, 5 times 8 is the same thing as saying 8 times 5, because 5 times 8 is 40, and 8 times 5 is also 40. We can use variables with this as well. So for number 4, we have A times B, and that would be the same thing as saying B times A. Now we're going to look at the associative property. The associative property tells us that changing the grouping of addends or factors does not change the sum or product. So first we'll look at addition. So for number 1, we have the quantity 7 plus 4 and then plus 2 would be the same thing, or that would equal 7 plus the quantity 4 plus 2. If you look at the left-hand side, 7 plus 4 is 11, and 11 plus 2 is 13. On the right-hand side, you can do 4 plus 2 first, since it's in parentheses, and that's 6, and 7 plus 6 is also 13. We can also write this using variables. So the quantity A plus B plus C would be equal to A plus the quantity B plus C. We can also do this with multiplication. So for number 3, we have the quantity 7 times 4 times 2, and that would be the same thing as saying 7 times the quantity 4 times 2. If you look at the left-hand side, 7 times 4 is 28, and 28 times 2 is 56. And on the right-hand side, if we do the parentheses first, we'd have 4 times 2, which is 8, and 7 times 8 is 56. Now for number 4, we'll write this using variables. So the quantity A times B times C would be equal to A times the quantity B times C. Now we're going to use properties to simplify expressions. So for number 1, we have 10 plus the quantity A plus 9. We can use the commutative property of addition to switch the order of the numbers, the number and the variable, in parentheses. So we would have 10 plus the quantity 9 plus A. Next, we can use the associative property of addition to change the order that we're going to add this in. So instead of adding 9 plus A first, we're now going to add 10 plus 9 first, and then we'll add A. And now we can go ahead and add 10 plus 9, which is 19, so our answer is 19 plus A. We cannot simplify this anymore because we don't know what A equals, so this would be our answer. And now for number 2, we have 5 times the quantity 4n. We can use the associative property of multiplication to show which we're going to multiply first. We were multiplying 4n, and instead we're going to multiply 5 times 4. So now we have 5 times 4 multiplied first, and then times n. So we have the quantity 5 times 4 times n. Next, we'll multiply 5 times 4, which is 20, so our answer is 20n. Since we don't know what n equals, we cannot simplify this anymore. Next, we're going to look at the addition property of 0. The addition property of 0 tells us the sum of any number and 0 is that number. So for number 1, if I have 7 plus 0, we can see that the sum of any number plus 0 is that number. So it's going to equal 7. And the same thing with using a variable. A plus 0 would equal A. Now we'll look at the multiplication properties of 0 and 1. For the multiplication property of 0, the product of any number and 0 is 0. So if we multiply any number times 0, we get 0. And for the multiplication property of 1, the product of any number and 1 is that number. So now looking at the multiplication property of 0. Number 1, we have 9 times 0, and any number times 0 is going to be 0. We can also look at this using a variable. So for number 2, A times 0 would be equal to 0. Next, we'll look at the multiplication property of 1. This tells us that any number times 1 is that number. So for number 3, 4 times 1 is equal to 4. And for number 4, we'll use a variable this time. A times 1 would be equal to A. Now we're going to simplify the expressions using the properties. So for number 1, I have 1 times m times 24. So the first thing we can do is we can use the associative property of multiplication. It shows us that we're going to group together 1 times m and then times 24. So now I have the quantity 1 times m times 24. We know that the multiplication property of 1 tells us that 1 times the number equals that number. So 1 times m would equal m. So now we have m times 24. And m times 24 is the same thing as 24m. We can use the commutative property of multiplication because that tells us that we can change the order and it equals the same thing. So m times 24 is equal to 24m. Remember, when you have a number and a variable next to each other, that means multiplication, and you do not need to write a symbol in between them. Now for number 2, we have the quantity t plus 15 plus 0. We can use the associative property of addition to group together the 15 plus 0. So we can change which numbers are grouped together. So we're going to go ahead and group together 15 plus 0. We can use the addition property of 0 to show that 15 plus 0 is 15. 0 added to any number is that number. So now we have t plus 15.